Deep in the swamps of southern Louisiana, there's a community that broke one of humanity's oldest rules. They never buried their dead. Not once. Not in 300 years. You'd expect a graveyard. Every town has one. Rows of stones, a gate, maybe an old oak tree standing guard. But here, there's nothing. No headstones. No plots. No cemetery at all. And when you ask the locals why, they get quiet. Some change the subject. Others just point toward the water. Because in this Bayou town, the swamp took the dead. Not metaphorically. Literally. To understand why, you have to understand the ground itself. Louisiana Bayou country sits just a few feet above sea level, sometimes below it. Dig 6 inches down almost anywhere near the water, and you hit soup. Wet, black, shifting soil that won't hold a coffin the way solid earth does. Bury a body here the normal way, and within days, sometimes hours, it rises back to the surface. Coffins have been known to float. Grave markers sink and disappear. The land itself seems to reject burial. Most towns around Louisiana solve this problem the same way. They built up above-ground tombs, stacked crypts, cities of the dead, standing in rows like tiny stone houses, so families could visit and gravity wouldn't work against them. New Orleans is famous for it. But this particular community didn't build up either. They didn't build anything. They gave their dead to the bayou itself. The tradition, according to the oldest families still living there, goes back to the earliest settlers, a mix of French Acadian exiles, freed and enslaved people, and native communities who already understood the water better than anyone. When someone died, there was a ceremony, sometimes lasting through the night, with music that sounded more like a celebration than a mourning. Then, at a certain point before dawn, the body would be taken out by boat, deep into the marsh, to a place only a few people in each generation were trusted to know. What happened after that depends on who you ask. Some say the body was given directly to the water, wrapped and weighted, returned to the current the same way the community believed all life eventually returns to the swamp that sustains it. Others describe something stranger, hidden platforms built high in the cypress trees, out past where any boat could easily reach, where the dead were left in the branches, exposed to open air, until the bayou itself finished the job. No stone marker. No name carved anywhere. Just water, wood, and time. To outsiders, that might sound unsettling. To this community, it was the opposite of a horror story. It was intimacy. A refusal to trap the people they loved under 6 feet of dirt in a place they'd never chosen. The swamp had fed them their whole lives, fish, crawfish, cypress for their homes, and in death, they gave themselves back to it. No grave to visit meant no grave to abandon. No crumbling headstone forgotten by grandchildren 2 generations later. Instead, the whole bayou became the memorial. Every paddle stroke through that water was, in a way, a visit. But there's a second half to this story, and it's the part that turns a strange local custom into something people still argue about today. Because not everyone believed this practice was purely spiritual. As the town grew and outside visitors, missionaries, surveyors, and later, state officials started passing through, whispers followed the community wherever they went. Whispers about disease. About what happens when a place refuses to formally record its own deaths for centuries. No death certificates that match state requirements. No official graves to inspect. No paper trail at all in some of the earliest recorded decades. To the outside world, that absence looked like something being hidden. In the early 20th century, health officials attempted to intervene, citing concerns about waterborne contamination from the practice, and pushed for the community to adopt standard burial or cremation. The pushback from residents was immediate and fierce. Elders argued that their method had sustained the town for longer than any modern sanitation policy had existed, and that the same water they were being told was dangerous had never once made their community sick. They pointed instead to towns with conventional cemeteries built on that same soft ground, where flooding regularly unearthed caskets and sent them drifting down streets after heavy storms. Arguably a far messier problem than anything the Bayou tradition had ever caused. The standoff lasted years. Some families quietly began adopting above-ground tombs to avoid conflict with the state. Others refused entirely, continuing the old ceremonies deep in the marsh where no inspector could follow. Today, walk through the town, and you'll find a strange split. A small cemetery near the church, added sometime in the mid-1900s, holding only a fraction of the town's dead. And then, everywhere else, silence. Bayou stretching for miles, holding a history no map will ever show you. Locals will tell you the old practice still continues in some families, quietly, without documentation, exactly as it always has. Ask where, and you'll get a smile, maybe a shrug, and an answer that sounds almost rehearsed. The swamp doesn't need a map. It remembers on its own. So people started asking the obvious question. If nobody's digging graves and nobody's filing paperwork, how does anyone actually know this is true, and not just a story locals tell to keep tourists and inspectors away? That question is exactly what brought in a small team of folklore researchers back in the 1980s, the first outsiders the community ever let get close. Not officials this time. Not with badges or clipboards. Just people willing to sit on porches for weeks, drink chicory coffee, and listen instead of demand. What they found didn't disprove the tradition. It complicated it. Old maps of the parish, the hand-drawn kind made by trappers and fur traders long before the state ever surveyed the land, showed a section of marsh marked with a symbol nobody could initially explain. Not a skull, not a cross, just a small circle with 3 lines radiating outward, repeated in the same spot across 4 different maps spanning almost 100 years. When researchers finally asked the right elder the right question, they got their answer. That symbol meant returning place. It marked the stretch of cypress and open water where the ceremonies had always ended. They were allowed to see it. Once. From a distance, by boat, at the family's discretion, with a firm rule that nothing would be touched, photographed up close, or removed. What they described wasn't a graveyard in any conventional sense. No bones lying visible. No markers. Just an unusually dense stand of cypress trees, older and wider than anything nearby, growing in a rough circle, with a stillness to the water inside it that felt almost deliberate, like the current itself slowed down before it reached that spot. One researcher wrote that it was the quietest place she'd ever recorded sound in the wild. No birds. No insects. Just water moving through roots. That detail spread fast once the research got published, and it's the part that still gets people arguing in comment sections and campfire conversations today. Biologists offered an explanation almost immediately. Dense cypress knees and slow-moving backwater naturally muffle sound and discourage nesting birds. Nothing supernatural required. But locals had a different read. They said the swamp simply knew to be quiet there. That it had learned reverence the same way the town had. Whichever explanation you believe, one thing is undeniable, and it's the reason this story refuses to fade. This town never built a monument, never carved a single name into stone, and somehow the not remembering is what made everyone remember. No family forgot who they lost, because losing them was never separated from the land. They all still lived on. The bayou wasn't where the dead were put away. It was where they stayed present, in the water people fished from, the cypress people built with, the current that passed the same porches every single day. Modern development crept close a few times over the decades, a proposed highway extension, a marina project, a pipeline route, each one requiring an environmental and historical survey of exactly that stretch of marsh. And each time, without ever revealing the specifics, community elders quietly intervened, citing protected cultural land, and each time, the projects rerouted around it without official explanation ever entering the public record. Today, if you go looking for this place on a map, you won't find it labeled. You'll find swamp, unremarkable and green, stretching past where the road ends. Locals prefer it that way, because the moment it gets a name on a map, they say, is the moment it stops being theirs and starts being everyone else's. And maybe that's the real ending here. Not a mystery solved, but a mystery protected on purpose, generation after generation, by people who decided a long time ago that some places don't need headstones to be sacred. They just need someone willing to remember, quietly, forever.